Hi everyone, and welcome to the next chapter of Nimzowicz's My System. This time we'll look at chapter 7 of the Elements, which is entitled The Pin. Of course, the pin is a simple tactical idea that crops up often in chess, but Nimzowitsch goes into great depth, discussing its various elements, as you'll see. He opens the chapter by explaining that after the difficult previous chapter, which dealt with positional issues, this chapter on the pin should be easy, and adds that whilst it is possible to base one's entire game around an open file or a passed pawn, the same does not strictly apply to a pin. However, he continues, a well-planned pin can be the basis that influences the way we construct the future of a game in our planning. Naturally, pins do not have to last forever, but they often lead to weakening moves from your opponent, and, as a result, their effects can last into the endgame. Thus, they definitely warrant close study and consideration. The following example shows a pinning motif. It was played by Haken and Giese in Riga in 1913. Haken opened with e4, and then came e6, so the French defense, d4, d5, and now the exchange variation, which is hardly ever seen at top level and thought to give black immediate equality after e takes d5. So the game continued. Knight f3, bishop d6, bishop d3, knight f6, and h3. Because in the exchange French, the pinning ideas of bishop g4 and bishop g5 are common, so white plays this as prophylaxis against the pin. Play continued with both sides castling, and now h6. Black also prevents the said pin with bishop g5. The next 15 moves are not so important to us, so I'll just go through them quickly. Black has taken over the e-file here. Both players are playing to win squares, but black is definitely doing better because this e4 outpost he's secured, which is clearly the strategical base for his play, all the pieces aiming at it. And this is one of several good choices black has in the exchange French. So knight h4, bishop h7, and play continued like this. The game isn't too important, we're just going to get to a key moment in a second. And now, at this moment, for Nimzowitsch, the key event of the game happened regarding the pin motif, because due to white playing h3 in fear of this pin bishop g4 in the opening, black now has the attractive option of playing for h5 and g4 at the right moment, which he would not have had otherwise. When it was played, h3 was a defensive move, but also weakening, and one of black's subsequent attacking ideas is based around it. Thus, the threat of the pin has resulted in play some 20 moves later and is directly related to the threatened pin in the opening. As it happened, black didn't play this way, but focused instead on the e-file and won a nice game. But the important thing to bear in mind is that the threat of the pin resulted in a weakening move that gave black an attacking chance later. Okay, so next thing Nimzowitsch discusses is this picture here, this diagram. And what he was illustrating is the concept of the completely or partially pinned piece. In a pin, he said, there are three actors. 1, the piece that is doing the pinning. 2, the opposing piece that is being pinned. 3, the pinned piece behind the pinned piece. Of course, in a pin, the pinning piece is attacking the piece behind the pinned piece. The piece at the rear is often a king or a queen, but not always. All three pieces are always on the same rank file or diagonal. The pinned piece cannot move away, or the piece behind will be exposed to the threatened attack. If this lack of mobility is absolute, i.e. if the piece cannot move at all, such as the knight in this diagram, then Nimzowitsch referred to it as a complete pin. If, on the other hand, the pinned piece can move about a little, such as the pawn here, which can advance to h5, then it's a partial pin. When a knight is pinned, it is always completely pinned. Of the other pieces, it is only possible to partially pin one that moves in the same way as the attacking piece. Of course, it's important to remember that the protection offered by a pinned piece is imaginary. Thus, when we have such a pin, we can leave our pieces en prise to the pinned piece, as long as we're careful to avoid tactics that break the pin. For example, in this diagram. So the bishop is pinned, and white is going to win very quickly after queen takes g3 check, exploiting the pinned bishop and winning the black queen. Thus, when we install a pin, it's always good to consider which squares are weakened as a result. It is also always worthwhile playing to win the pinned piece. Of course, any immobile or even slightly restrained piece is weak. As before, we must always bear in mind that our opponent will strive to break the pin if it is having a bad effect on his game, and that suddenly the strength of the pinned piece can be miraculously restored if we overlook something. As before, to win the piece, we simply pile on the attackers and thin out the lines of our opponent's defenders. Especially with pins, an attack by a pawn is decisive. Of course, if a piece cannot move, then being attacked by a pawn means certain doom. For example, the rook here on c7 is pinned. So if you want to figure out the strongest move, stop the video now. It's not too difficult. The answer, of course, is rook takes a5. And after b takes a5, b6, exploiting the pin. And white wins fairly easily from here. Nimzowitsch then re-emphasizes the fact that with a pin, we must take great trouble to ensure that we have a superiority of attacking material in comparison to our opponent's defenders. Often with pins, the final blow will come with an attack by a pawn, as is the case in this example. Another example is this one. The knight is pinned, and the object of attack isn't a piece this time, but the h7 square, where mate is threatened by the rook. And white has advanced his h-pawn so that black cannot unpin with king h7, g6, like this. And the pressure created by the pin is substantial, but for the moment it's not decisive. The answer for white is, of course, to advance his f-pawn. Once it gets to f6, the knight is lost, and with it the game. Another thing to consider with pins is what Nimzowitsch referred to as the exchanging combination on the pinning square. For example, here the idea is, of course, to win the pinned pawn on g7, and the answer is simple because white has already achieved the majority of attacking force with his knight, rook and pawn all able to attack the square. However, the pawn is not completely pinned, as it can advance to g6, and so white solves this by instating a complete pin with knight takes g7, and after bishop takes g7, the bishop is now fully pinned, so f6, and wins. White removed one of the defenders of the g7 square, the bishop, which now has become the pinned piece, and his new majority of 2 pieces attacking g7 to 1 defender, as opposed to 3 to 2 as it was before, maintains the lead, but in a more decisive manner. Okay, so now we'll look at a famous example of pin. This was played by a young Paul Morphy against the Duke of Brunswick in a theatre. Morphy opened with e4, then came e5, knight f3, and now d6, the Philidor defense, which has since become a little outdated. So d4, bishop g4, it's creating a pin by the Duke of Brunswick, but it's kind of a dubious move because after d takes e5, black has to give up the bishop with loss of tempo. in order to avoid losing a pawn. So bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, d takes e5. So now bishop c4 from Morphy, attacking f7 in conjunction with the queen. So knight f6, and now queen b3 attacks f7 again, as well as b7. And the white already has a huge advantage here. Brunswick played queen e7, and Morphy continued with knight c3. Although bishop takes f7 was already winning due to the attack on b7. So knight c3, now c6, now bishop g5s, creating a pin, but the main idea is to facilitate castling long. And this also tempts white to play the dangerous, black to play the dangerous b5, which the Duke of Brunswick did. So now comes the killer, knight takes b5, c takes b5, bishop takes b5 check, knight b d7, and this pin is decisive. So now Morphy castled long, and he was only a very young boy when this game was played as well. And the point of castling long like this is the quickest way to get both rooks to attack down the d file. So white is now threatening simply bishop takes d7, and a monstrous attack. The pin on the f6 knight means it too is immobile, so black would have to be giving up his queen or just getting really badly done over. So rook d8 is what Brunswick played to defend the knights. And white can now simply double rooks on the d file and win the knight, but there's a much faster way to win. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Rook takes d7 is the move, an exchange combination. It's a different motif from the last example, as the knight on d7 was already completely pinned, as is the rook after rook takes d7, but this speeds up white's attack by a tempo, as opposed to playing rook d2 and rook hd1 and then taking. And the point is, before white played rook takes d7, he had two pieces attacking d7, and black had two defenders in the rook and the king. The queen can't be counted because to lose it is to lose the game, and then the knight on f6 also doesn't count because it's pinned. So after rook d1, white renews his attack, and he now has two attackers against one defender. And this is the second motif in the pin, the gain of tempo. Brunswick continued with queen e6, breaking the pin, and Morphy, of course, had already foreseen his very elegant finish when the bishop takes d7, knight takes d7, and it's important to note this knight is also now pinned because of the mate threat on d8, and this allows white to finish in style with queen b8 check, knight takes b8, the only move, and now rook d8 is mate. And yeah, a very nice game from Morphy that illustrates the power of a pin very nicely. Okay, that's the end of part 1.